I'm pregnant, and the father of this baby is you. Rebecca said it in the middle of her own birthday dinner. Her hand was still resting on my shoulder, like she was thanking me for something sweet. The room went so quiet. I could hear the waves rolling in from the shore. My son lowered his head, pretending to be heartbroken. Everyone turned to look at Sharon, waiting for her to collapse. But I didn't stand up. I didn't deny a thing. I simply lifted my glass and smiled. Because 4 months earlier, I already knew they were going to do this. Before the real story begins, if you enjoy dramatic turns and hard-earned lessons about family like this, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I truly do read every single one. Now, let me take you back to that day. I held my wine glass a little longer than necessary, not because I was shaking. At 74, my hands don't tremble so easily anymore. I held it because I wanted the silence to stretch. Just a few seconds more. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any denial ever could. Rebecca was still standing there. The chandelier light shimmered against her cream silk dress. She wasn't crying, not confused. Her eyes moved across the room, studying every reaction, like an actress waiting for applause after the most important monologue of her life. Ryan sat on my right. He pressed a hand to his forehead, let out a long breath, playing the part of a son who had just discovered his father had destroyed the family. I once taught him how to negotiate, how to read a rival's eyes across a boardroom table. I never thought I would need those same skills to read my own son. I turned to Sharon. She didn't faint, didn't scream, didn't slam the table. She just looked at me. That look was enough. We were still standing on the same side. I raised my glass, lightly tapped it against Rebecca's. "Congratulations on the grandchild that's on the way," I said, my voice steady, no higher than usual. A spoon clinked against a plate at the far end of the table. Someone dropped a napkin. A guest forced a nervous laugh. The air felt heavy, like wet wood. Rebecca froze for a split second. She had been waiting for anger, or denial, or at least embarrassment. I gave her none of it. I took a slow sip of wine. "How long have you known?" I asked, as if we were discussing the weather. "Almost 2 months," she replied, still trying to sound calm. "Almost 2 months. A carefully prepared number." Ryan lifted his head. His eyes were red. "Dad, aren't you going to say something?" I set my glass down. "Tonight is your wife's birthday," I said. "Let's not ruin the mood." I heard a few quiet sighs. Not relief, confusion. They didn't understand why I wasn't following the script they had written for me. I looked around the table. Old business partners from Connecticut, a few investors from Manhattan, an elderly couple who lived in the mansion across the bay. Everyone was watching. Rebecca had chosen her moment well. Public, crowded, social pressure, heavy enough to push any man into a corner. She thought I would protect my reputation by staying quiet and giving in. She didn't understand how many rooms I've survived, where a reputation could collapse from a single, careless sentence. I nodded gently to the event manager. The music resumed, soft and slow. "Let's cut the cake," I said. Rebecca still hadn't sat down. She looked at Ryan. He looked back. A silent exchange, their plan drifting off course. "Ronald," Rebecca said, the first time she had called me by name that night, "don't you have anything to say to Sharon?" That was the real blade. I turned to my wife. Sharon smiled faintly, so faint most people would call it polite. The composure of an older woman facing family scandal. I knew it was a signal. "Sharon knows the kind of man I am," I said. "She doesn't believe stories told across a dinner table." Rebecca bit her lip. Ryan's hand tightened into a fist. I could feel the heartbeat of the entire room, waiting for an explosion. I didn't give them one. I stood slowly, no rush. "I built most of my fortune from deals where people tried to force me to react quickly," I said, my voice even. "I learned one thing. When someone wants you to react immediately, it's usually because they don't want you to have time to think." No one spoke. Rebecca finally sat down, her back no longer straight. I didn't explain, didn't deny, didn't defend myself. I let the story hang in the air, because sometimes what unsettles people most isn't anger. It's calm. That night the party continued. Glasses clinked. Waves rolled against the shore of the Hamptons. Golden light washed over faces trying to look natural. But I knew The moment Rebecca stood and said those words, a door had closed. They thought they were breaking my family. In truth, they had just stepped into the final chapter of a plan I had prepared long ago, and I wondered, when the truth finally comes out, who among them will still be steady enough to raise a glass the way I just did. That night, when the last guest left the mansion, the tide had come in. I stood alone on the terrace, staring at the dark water. It looked like a mirror, reflecting nothing at all. People think a single shock shatters a family overnight. The truth is, the cracks are always there long before. We just choose not to see them. 4 months before that party, I saw the first crack. Not in a word, not in a glance, in a camera screen. My office on the second floor has its own private security system, separate from the main network of the house. I've kept that habit since my days running the corporation. One morning, reviewing archived footage, I noticed 3 gaps in the recording history. Each gap lasted exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes is enough time to open a safe, enough to photograph documents, enough to copy a hard drive, but not enough for a stranger to sneak in and out without leaving a trace. What caught my attention wasn't that the system had been interrupted. It was how cleanly it was done. No malfunction, no error alert. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. I didn't ask Ryan. I didn't ask Rebecca. I learned long ago, when suspicion appears, the worst move is confrontation. People correct mistakes. They hide things. They erase evidence. I chose silence. I hired someone I've trusted for many years. Not a movie-style detective, just a specialist in financial and data analysis. A man familiar with wealthy families and complicated secrets. 2 weeks later, he called. "There's something you should know," he said. Ryan had undergone a medical procedure 5 years ago. Simple, voluntary. The records were filed at a private clinic in Connecticut. I listened without interrupting. I don't judge my son's choices. It's his body. But I understood one thing very clearly. If he no longer had the ability to father a child naturally, then any future claim about a baby required careful scrutiny. I set the phone down and sat there for a long time. Not because I was hurt, but because I realized the story hadn't begun yet, and the script had already been written. 3 weeks later, another discovery surfaced. Rebecca had been meeting regularly with a man who worked part-time at our summer estate last year, a house staff member who left after a financial misunderstanding. I remembered his face. Polite, quiet. The meetings didn't happen in public. They took place in a short-term rental apartment in Manhattan. I didn't need more details to see the picture forming. But what made me think the most was motive. Ryan was in debt, not small amounts. Numbers larger than I had imagined. Credit cards, personal loans, trips I never questioned. I didn't step in right away. I wanted to see what choice he would make when pressure increased. Pressure for some people creates diamonds. For others, it exposes fractures. I reviewed my will, the trust in Ryan's name. There's a clause most people overlook, a morality clause. If an heir engages in fraudulent conduct to obtain assets, their benefits can be suspended. It wasn't written for this exact situation, but it exists. I didn't tell Sharon at first. I needed to be certain I wasn't imagining patterns that weren't there. When I finally showed her the evidence, she didn't cry, didn't rage. She asked me one question: "How do you want to handle it?" That question told me. I wasn't alone. We didn't plan revenge. Neither of us wanted to destroy our own son. We simply decided to let the truth stand up at the right moment. I continued watching. No interference. No warning. I even pretended not to notice when Rebecca grew unusually affectionate. Touches that lingered too long. Compliments placed where they didn't belong. I knew she was building emotional groundwork. So when the announcement came, it would feel believable. But they miscalculated one thing. Years ago, after a surgery of my own, I made certain medical decisions. Those records are stored in 2 separate hospitals in Boston. I'm not proud that I had to consider using such documents against my own family, but I wasn't the one who chose this road. That birthday night wasn't an impulsive moment. It was a scheduled meeting point of a plan I had seen from far away. When I raised my glass and congratulated the grandchild in front of everyone, it wasn't acceptance. It was confirmation that I was ready. And when I caught that flicker of confusion in Ryan's eyes, I understood something. What unsettled him wasn't the accusation. It was the fact that I didn't react like a man cornered. 4 months ago, they believed they were opening a door. They didn't realize I was already standing behind it, waiting for them to step through. On Rebecca's birthday night, after the cake was cut and the guests began drifting away from the table, I stood up once more. No one was laughing naturally anymore. Conversations broke apart mid-sentence. Eyes kept sliding back toward me. I said I had a small gift. Rebecca let out a soft breath, probably thinking I had finally chosen silence, maybe even a quiet apology, dressed up as generosity. Ryan adjusted his collar, preparing for the next act in their little play. I signaled to the technical manager. The large screen at the back of the room flickered on. For the first few seconds, it showed the small sitting room in the west wing of the estate, a room rarely used. No music, no edits, just a fixed camera angle. Rebecca frowned slightly. Then the audio came through, Ryan's voice. Not the trembling performance from the dinner table. This was low, steady, calculated. If he believes the child is his, everything changes. Mom won't survive that kind of shock, Rebecca answered. Calmer than I had ever heard her in person. We just need one evening. Create the setting. The rest will be their emotions. No one in the room moved. I wasn't watching the screen. I was watching the faces, watching it. Ryan shot to his feet. Dad, this! I lifted my hand. Not high. Just enough. He understood I wasn't finished. The recording wasn't long. It didn't need to be. A few minutes of conversation, clear enough to frame the picture. When the screen went dark, the room fell silent, the way it does before a storm reaches shore. Rebecca could no longer hold her posture. She turned to Ryan, waiting for a replacement explanation. I spoke slowly. The camera in that room was interrupted 3 times last month. I replaced the system before you realized. I wasn't accusing. I was stating facts. Ryan stepped toward me, then stopped. He knew how many people were witnessing this. You were spying on me, he asked. I was protecting my home, I replied. No shouting, no chairs scraping, just the growing distance between us. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thin envelope. I have another gift, I said, turning to Rebecca. I didn't hand it to her. I placed it on the table. Inside are copies of my medical records, from 2 independent facilities. I underwent a procedure many years ago. The results are clear. I didn't elaborate. Those who understood, understood. Rebecca's face drained of color. Ryan stepped back half a pace. That means I continued, my voice steady. Any child mentioned tonight is not connected to me. A whisper traveled down the length of the table. I didn't look at Sharon. I knew she was sitting upright, the same way she had been for 4 months. Quiet, steady. Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it again. She could deny it, claim the video was edited, but the words in it were too precise, too deliberate. I let a few seconds pass. Then I said the one thing they hadn't anticipated. The trust in Ryan's name was amended 1 month ago. Ryan looked at me, this time truly confused. Why I activated the conduct clause, I said. When an heir engages in deception to influence family assets, benefits may be suspended. You can't do that, Ryan said, but his voice lacked certainty. I already did. There was no drama in that sentence, just legal fact. I didn't strip my son of everything overnight. I froze the portion he believed he could manipulate. Rebecca scanned the room, searching for an invisible exit, but what unsettled her most wasn't the evidence. It was that I wasn't angry. I didn't call anyone a traitor, didn't insult, didn't sever ties in front of strangers. I simply revealed what they had prepared. I stepped back, resting my hands on the back of a chair. I don't know who the child in this story belongs to, I said evenly, but I know very clearly what does not belong to me. Rebecca's hands tightened. Ryan stared at the floor. For the first time, I didn't see defiance in my son's eyes. I saw recognition. He understood the board had been read several moves ahead, but I wasn't finished. The video was only the surface. Behind it, another truth was waiting to be named. And tonight, I had no intention of leaving anything in the dark. I let go of the chair and walked slowly toward the main table. The eyes following me were no longer curious. They were waiting. If I stopped here, I would have won a small round. There was a deeper layer they hadn't prepared for. "Ryan," I said, not raising my voice. He looked up, defensive, confused. "Did you really think I found out about this plan tonight?" He didn't answer. I turned to the manager near the door. He understood and handed me a tablet. This time I didn't project anything onto the big screen. Only the three of us needed to see it. I placed the device in front of Ryan. "I've known for 4 months," I said quietly, loud enough for Rebecca to hear. Not because of the camera, because of a signature. Rebecca stiffened. "Do you remember the internal share transfer documents from October?" I asked him. His face drained of color. He knew exactly what I meant. There was an addendum attached, a clause only 3 family members were authorized to access. Rebecca's chair shifted slightly backward. "A 4th person accessed it using your credentials." I continued, still looking at Ryan. "From an IP address that doesn't belong to the company office." His hands tightened into fists. "You were tracking me, I was tracking the system," I replied. "And the system showed me someone was restructuring inheritance terms before the baby was ever mentioned." The room had changed. Guests had instinctively stepped back, leaving space around us. This was no longer gossip. It was a reckoning. Rebecca straightened, forcing calm into her voice. "You don't have proof I was involved." I looked at her directly, for the first time that night. "You didn't sign anything," I said. "You didn't log in. Your name doesn't appear anywhere. But the legal advisor you introduced to Ryan drafted that addendum." This silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. Ryan turned toward Rebecca. The certainty they shared in the video was gone. Only questions remained. "You told me it was just a backup plan," Rebecca whispered. "I didn't know you were actually changing the clause." I didn't interrupt. The truth didn't need my help anymore. Ryan looked at me. "You knew, so why didn't you stop me from the start?" There was no challenge in his voice, only searching. I inhaled slowly. "Because I wanted to see how far you would go if no one stopped you." Rebecca let out a strained laugh. "So you turned your own son into a moral experiment?" "No," I said evenly. "I simply didn't shield him from the consequences of his choices." I stepped back, giving them space to face each other clearly. 4 months ago, when I realized the child was just a tool, I could have called the lawyers. Exposed everything. Ended the engagement immediately. But I didn't. Ryan frowned. "Why? Because then you would have believed you failed only because you were caught," I said. "Now you understand you failed because you chose wrong." Rebecca turned sharply toward me. "You're manipulating this to teach a lesson." "You call it manipulation," I replied calmly. "I call it giving an opportunity." A long pause. Then Ryan spoke, his voice lower than before. "Is the trust really frozen? Only the portion tied to decision-making authority," I said. "You still have your personal assets, but you won't be making decisions on behalf of this family." He lowered his head. For the first time that night, I saw his shoulders drop. Not from attack, but from awareness. Rebecca looked around, realizing she stood alone between 2 generations. "You're not going to believe him, are you?" she said, trying to pull Ryan back to her side. Ryan didn't answer right away. He looked at me, then at her. "You said we just needed a story," he said slowly. "Just enough to make Dad panic." Rebecca pressed her lips together. I didn't think he'd be this prepared. "So, you still think you were right?" Ryan asked. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. The climax wasn't in the documents. It wasn't in the video. It was in the crack forming between 2 people who once stood united. Rebecca drew a breath. "I think we deserved more than what he controls," she said. "You grew up in his shadow. I just wanted to help you claim your share." Ryan held her gaze for a long moment. "By inventing a child that doesn't exist," she didn't answer. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not because I won, but because Ryan stepped away from the plan himself. I walked closer and placed a hand on my son's shoulder. Not to restrain him, just to affirm something. "You're still my son," I said quietly. "Not because of assets, not because of shares, but because of the choices you make from here." Rebecca turned toward the door, finally understanding she no longer had an audience. "I won't stay where I'm treated like a criminal," she said, her voice cold. "That's your choice," I replied, "but don't call it love. If it begins with deception." She walked out. Her heels echoed softly against the stone floor. No one stopped her. No one followed. The door closed. Only Ryan, myself, and the truth remained. He sat down, hands clasped together. "I thought I was smarter than this," he said almost to himself. "You are smart," I answered, "but intelligence doesn't replace integrity." He nodded slowly. Outside, guests slipped away quietly. No more whispers. The party had ended long ago. Only its echo remained. I looked at my son, not as an heir, not as an opponent, but as a man standing at a crossroads. The climax of the night wasn't about money lost or saved. It was about who remains whole. After the masks fall, and for the first time in 4 months, I felt the door I had left open could finally close. Not with anger, but with a new choice. Ryan remained seated, his fingers intertwined. His eyes no longer avoided mine. The large room slowly emptied as the last guests stepped out. A distant door closed, softly returning the house to its natural quiet. Not the heavy silence of the past 4 months, but the calm that settles after a long storm. I sat down across from my son. No screens, no evidence, no audience. Just the two of us. "Do you regret it?" I asked. Not to interrogate, but to open a door. He took his time before answering. "I regret thinking I had to beat you, in order to become myself. I let that sit between us." He continued, slower now. "I grew up in a family where every decision was certain. You were always right. Your plans always worked. I didn't know how to prove I was capable, unless I stepped out of your shadow." I looked at him differently then, not as the man in control, but as a father who may have built a standard too high without realizing it. "You don't have to tear anything down to stand beside me," I said. "You just have to build something of your own." He looked up. "And what if I fail?" "You will," I said, and this time I truly smiled. I did too. I just didn't let anyone see it. Another silence, warmer now. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a different folder. Not the freeze order. Not legal restraints. "This is the development plan for the new Southern branch," I said. "I've prepared it for 6 months, but I haven't signed it." Ryan looked surprised. "Why?" "Because I want you to lead it." He shook his head instinctively. "After everything tonight." Because of tonight, I slid the folder toward him. "You just went through a lesson no school can teach. You understand the cost of choosing wrong. Now you can choose right." He opened the folder and flipped through a few pages. His eyes were no longer confused. They were focused. "Careful. Aren't you afraid I'll fail again? I'm more afraid you'll never be given the chance to correct your mistake." For the first time in 4 months, I saw it clearly. Maturity doesn't come from winning. It comes from awareness. "What about the trust?" he asked. "It stays as it is for now," I said. "Not as punishment. As a reminder." He nodded. No argument this time. Outside the window, the garden lights were still on. The night had moved far beyond when the party began. 4 months of tension, doubt, preparation, ended in a moment no one could have predicted like this. "Rebecca won't come back," Ryan said quietly. "Love isn't a strategy," I replied. "If a relationship begins with calculation, it will always require more calculation to survive." He nodded. No longer in pain. Just a soft regret, like a wound closing. "I thought I was in love," he said. "Maybe you were," I answered. "But you were also afraid. And when people are afraid of losing control, they accept the wrong solutions." He closed the folder. "I want to rebuild," he said. "Not to surpass you, but to be worthy of what you built." I stood and walked beside him. "I don't need you to surpass me," I said. "I just need you not to lose yourself." He stood as well. There was no dramatic apology, no emotional embrace, just a nod, between two men who had crossed a line and come back, and that was enough. 2 months later, the Southern branch officially launched under Ryan's leadership. I didn't interfere with every decision. I stayed in an advisory role, watching from a distance. He made a few small mistakes. He corrected them himself. He didn't look for shortcuts. Each time he presented progress reports, he no longer searched my face for suspicion. He simply spoke, clearly and honestly. One afternoon, standing on the rooftop of the newly completed building, looking down at the traffic below, Ryan said, "I used to think power meant control. Now I understand. Real power is the ability to take responsibility." I looked at my son, no longer trying to prove something, but building something. "You learned faster than I expected," I said. "I learned because you didn't give up on me," he replied. I thought back to that birthday night, the lights, the screen, the truth revealed, the door closing. If I had chosen anger instead of patience, I might have kept my assets, but lost my son. Instead, I chose another path, and that choice saved us both. The evening wind moved across the rooftop, carrying the scent of fresh concrete and an unwritten future. Ryan stood straight, eyes fixed ahead. I know he will stumble again, but he won't invent stories to claim what is his, because he understands now the most valuable thing in this family was never the shares. It was trust, and that trust, after everything, remains intact. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in second chances, in family, in the quiet strength of patience, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Thank you for staying with me to the very end. I'll see you in the next story.